So, welcome. We're going to do a little overview of the tech stack of our application, and then we're going to go into the infrastructure of the AWS services and resources that we use to actually deploy it. And then finally, we'll actually do an actual live demo of the application. So, you see we have a few different sections of our application here. It's called Weallison. I'll kind of explain that later. But the front end, for the most part, we did it in React because it's very stateful, very fast as far as front-end programming goes. And it's useful to put things into components for reusability and modifications later down the line without having to refactor the entire application itself. So React was awesome. React is a framework comprised of JavaScript, CSS, and cascading style sheets, and HTML. And so we used a lot of those three languages in the framework in order to build the front end of the application. And then there's several packages installed with the Node package manager that we also used as well. So moving into the back end, a little more complicated, just as far as getting everything set up, we use Django, which is a framework for Python. We use that to create a few different models for our data. So you'll see later in our application we have data as far as a post goes, which is just a URL string. And then we have data for comments, and that each comment model has parent IDs. It has the content itself. It has like the author, has a date string, has a lot of different fields that go with the commenting models. And then we also have the user models, which actually came with Django. Those were pre-built Django libraries that were made for authentication. So it made it pretty simple to allow our user to sign in and to make that something that we can access throughout the application, to access the current user, so that we know when they want to make a post or they want to make a comment that we know who did it, who's the author. Nginx and gUnicorn are just some services that helped on the backend side to actually host our server, to get it running on a certain port, make it accessible, along with Route 53, which is part of AWS's infrastructure. We got a domain name from there, and we'll go over that a little more later. So going on to the DevOps, we use Git, of course. I use Git a bunch, GitHub, and VS Code was my main IDE. The big thing about Git for this project is that I'm building everything on my computer here, and then when it comes time to deploy it on the back end, I'm going to want to just clone my whole repository, maybe do some configuration on that end, which is exactly what I did. But other than that, yeah, Git's just perfect for that. I've never used another VCS before. And then for the infrastructure, everything was built in AWS. So S3 bucket is hosting our front end, and then from there we have the API configured, the URL in the front end configured to point to the API in our back end, which is in Django. That's the REST API we built. So we have our front end on S3 bucket. We have a back end in the EC2 instance. This is an Ubuntu EC2 instance. We installed Nginx to Unicorn over there. We had the actual Python Django backend running on there, available on port 8080, I want to say. Not that that is relevant too much. And then, yeah, we use CloudFront to content delivery to cache data close to our endpoint users, and so that basically avoids re-rendering or refetching all of the data and files for every single load of our application. Instead, it'll cache all of the basically static files or things that the user will see often. And then Route 53, like I said, it's for getting our domain name, and then it also helps update our records as far as subdomains, as far as having the API domain point to the backend IP address of our EC2 instance, and more. It helped with setting up the SSL tickets and whatnot to make sure we had a secure connection. So that's basically our tech stack, and let's hop over to this next tab. We have this little program here called CloudCraft. So what CloudCraft does is it lets you create an IAM role to allow read access to your resources, give it to this other AWS account, who basically I assume is one of the developers or just the one associated with this program. And then when this program has access to that, it's going to build all of these beautiful little areas, little regions, diagrams of, here we have our S3 buckets, and then if we go over here a little bit, we have our CloudFront caches, the CloudFront that I actually created. This is our Route 53 domain. And so this basically explains a little bit of our the ecosystem of AWS, of our infrastructure. Over here is where our actual EC2 instance is. You'll see it exists within a subnet, and there is a security group here in that same subnet. Subnets and security groups, for me, the way I associated them was to keep them together. So a public subnet will have a public security group, and a private subnet would have the same. And then more security groups for like a load balancer or whatever down the line. So what I did was make a public security group for my public subnet, place that within a VPC. That VPC has an internet gateway, which allows it to speak with the internet to and from. And then that is how our EC2 instance receives requests from our front end and sends the data back. You'll see down here also, just to go over real quick, this isn't how it was actually deployed, but I did try to deploy this within a private subnet. So I had a Bastion host to connect to from my main computer, and then with that Bastion host, I was able to connect to a private EC2 instance. However, I was running into a lot of network errors, and I spent days alone troubleshooting network errors for other reasons, trying to get my HTTPS to work with the SSL certificate, which I did end up doing, so that's good. But yeah, I had a plan to use a Bastion host. I had some kind of port forwarding idea I was going with here, but it just never came to fruition, which is okay. You see over here we have our S3 buckets. This is where CloudFront reroutes to, not CloudFront, I apologize. Route 53 reroutes to when it is trying to resolve your domain names. So I had www point to my www.Weallison, my website bucket, and it's pointing to that endpoint there. And then we have a second one that just reroutes to the www, even if the user doesn't type in www. And either way, it's secure connection. But that's basically the infrastructure of our application. There are a lot more smaller services and tweaks I had to do here and there, but overall, I like AWS. It's scalable and it's smart. So now let's go hop over to a new tab, and we'll just go straight to our application, www.weallison.com, type in enter, and I'll go ahead and log out because I want to showcase the user authentication and whatnot. So now that we're here on our login screen, we could go to the home page, which is what the first thing we're going to see. However, we're not logged in yet. So if we try to go to the home page by typing in the homepage route, or if we try to press the logo, the little title button, that'll actually redirect us to homepage. It doesn't work. We've created a protected route component that just reroutes us back to the login should the user not be authenticated on any pages or components that you wrap that protected route component in. So I will actually go ahead and create an account just to showcase that. So we have a register page here, and I want to create some new user. We'll call him Johnny, why not? And then the password will just be some password, type in register. It'll say nice, we've done this. I won't save that just because I don't want to. And so we could type in our credentials and log in. So that does showcase one of our Django backend endpoints. Those are the ones that help us create a user and log in with the user. And then obviously it stores all the user data here locally, as well as communicates with JWT tokens to constantly authenticate that user, at least for like an hour, I want to say, is how long my refresh token lasts. So yeah, that's how that works. That does showcase one of our endpoints. Here we have our landing page. I went ahead and just made it portfolio oriented because initially I had the timeline on the homepage, but I didn't like the way that looked. So I went ahead and made this little homepage, tweaked some things here, add some skills. This is going to be my portfolio in the future, just because I went ahead and registered a domain name. You know, it costs a few bucks here and there, so I might as well use it. Anyway, it's a nice little design. We have a nav bar here. I added this little scroll indicator at the top of the nav bar. It's kind of hard to see in this mode, but if we click our button up here, we have a dark mode, and if I scroll down there, you see it now. So it basically takes the window element, it recognizes the size of the screen, and I have like some JavaScript functions in order to calculate that. And yeah, so that works. That's on the nav bar, and that works on every page. We have a few other tabs I'll hop between before we go to the main functionality of this application. So we have a nice little About tab. I haven't added too much CSS to it yet, but it just tells a little bit about myself, and it has some links to popular social media or GitHub or whatever case may be. And then we have a Contact tab, which just has a nice little form. I haven't set up yet, but I'm going to set it up with MailChimp, I think, because excuse me, that's what I've seen people do online, and it's what I see to be one of the easier options. I know AWS has something like that as well, and I'm not sure if Google Firebase does, but I think they have some kind of mail service, at least for logging in, I know, for authentication. So going over to our timeline here, you'll see it'll take a second to load just because there's a lot of components here with these players. But basically the main idea of the application, why I called it Weallison, which is kind of we all listen, but in one quick form word, because I think the applications need to be a little short form word. But so the main point of the application is to share music as a user, and that's what these little players are for. So you have a link up top where you can share music, or you can make comments, and both comments and posts are kind of part of our API endpoints. For the comments, we have update, delete, and then create and list are within the same endpoint actually, which is pretty helpful. And then for the post, we just have list and create, because there's no need to delete a post unless you're an admin for our purposes of the application. So we'll see we're logged in as Johnny. Johnny likes the song 9 in the Afternoon. So he says, hey, that's a rad song. But he spelled song with 3 G's because Johnny, he doesn't spell too good all the time. He's going to say, oops. This is just showing a little functionality as far as adding a reply to comments. So comments are nested, and comments have parents in order to maintain that relationship in the database itself. So Johnny can say oops, or you'll see that we have this cancel button here instead if the text box is empty. So that just kind of makes use of the state of the text box in order to change the rendering of the button based on how the state changes. So Johnny will say oops, we'll go ahead and send a reply, and if he wants to correct his mistake here, he can press the edit button and do so, or we can press the delete button and it'll remove our comments. And so if Johnny wants to make a post, we'll just find a song that we like. Pumped Up Kicks is a good one. We'll go over here, put the link in, press send, and it'll refresh our page. It'll take a little moment to render in those players, like I said, but then you'll get the player in here. You got your little play button, and it does play some music. I don't know if you can hear that. So yeah, that's an API endpoint for making posts, for comments, multiple for comments. And that's kind of the main functionality of the application, or at least it was the idea when we first created it. Like I said, it definitely expanded into the actual portfolio kind of system that it is now. We have a nice reactive nav bar with the home button kind of implemented into the title of the application. We have these links to certain routes within our application. And if we fold or if we minimize our screen, eventually you'll see that the nav bar also minimizes, and it allows us to have this nice little drop down that is definitely helpful on mobile as well, but also on web applications where your screen, maybe you're using 50% one side, 50% the other. That happens plenty of times in programming. So yeah, that's about it. That's the functionality of application. Nice nav bar, nice scroll component. We have some cool CSS stuff here that I do enjoy. This is React Bootstrap that allowed us to use this little carousel. The comments in the timeline, something that I do want to note, two things actually. So one, I do like the idea of this application, and if I were to pursue it further, which I do plan to update it because I at least want to have it on my portfolio. I think it's a nice little application, even just for my own personal use. I would rather use a Spotify API to create a search bar that autofills, and rather than have a user submit a link, just because I feel that's very error prone to use the link. And then within the comments, I actually do have a component built for tree views that I used for an old contact page with just dummy data for, like, if you had a list of employees, you'll have basically, hey, this is their phone, their fax, their blah, blah, blah. These are all the employees within this department. These are all the departments within this company, whatever you want to say. But with that kind of tree view, we could create more of a infinitely nested comment system that could go 1, 2, 3, 4. People keep replying to replies. The only thing is I didn't want to readjust how I had set up the database after the fact. But I think that's something I would pursue further. But other than that, yeah, that's basically the entire application. Had a lot of fun building it. I learned some new things, a lot of refreshers, and honestly, it's kind of definitely motivates me to continue to work on more and more projects just for fun, just to hone my craft and whatnot. But with that being said, thank you for taking the time to watch my demo, listen to my infrastructure, and even the little rants here and there. I really appreciate it. And thanks.